All right, welcome back to the podcast. So we are going through this video that was created by Peter Santinello. He was allowed to interview James on the Crow reservation in Montana, and also interviewed James' father named Robin. I've previously spoken about some of the areas that were shown in that video and want to jump into talking about some of the tradition and cultural information that they mentioned in the video about Crow tribe culture. The Crow, the name that they call themselves is Apsaluga, and it means children of the large beak bird. They have their own flag. They have a tribal government, which is basically created by the United States American government, so they kind of have ties to that, and it's not the traditional government. So some things mentioned, I don't have these in any specific order, but when one of the first things mentioned was, they go into this store where they kind of run into this lady, a young lady, who talked about, recently they were hunting and killed a buck, and that was their first kill of the season, and it was gonna go. She gave that first kill to her clan uncle, and they talk in other parts of the episode about giving food to generations, giving food to a clan uncle is a way to give food to generations of people, like before and after the current generation, in a way. They talk about, food offerings for spirits to eat a small amount, and how it's all a cycle. I got a typo here, so my own typo in my own notes. So they mention the father, James, the son, he mentions, a lot of times you don't really see Crow hunting wearing orange. Usually when you see somebody wearing orange, it's a non-tribal person on tribal land on the Crow reservation hunting. He mentions that there's some friction because of the hunting, some friction because of the scarcity of some of the food resources, some friction because of the leasing of tribal lands to non-tribal people, which those lands originally were supposed to be only for the tribal Crow people. And also he mentions mainly that, the friction can be between, people who live on the reservation but don't respect the Crow and don't respect the Crow lands, the Crow people's lands. So he mentioned something about elk being able to see energy waves or RF waves. Some other animals that were talked about, horses. They talked about horses. They talked about cattle. They talked about bucks. They talked about deer and snapping turtles, and just all kinds of animals that are on the reservation that can be used for hunting, for food, fishing, things like that. Cattle, did I mention that already? Cows. James mentioned that social media can more recently allow people to be able to help other tribes, help other groups of people with issues that they might be going through, and to be able to communicate with one another as well as communicate with the outside world, kind of what's going on. And they mentioned a lot of information about living in multiple worlds. There's the modern world that has all of its conveniences and ancestral. They talk about ancestral and cultural food systems. The modern world has its conveniences, but some of the modern stuff, just because it's modern doesn't really mean that it's better. A lot of modern methods do take a lot of shortcuts and create a lot of health issues, especially when you start hearing about the land being exploited and the resources being stripped from the land. I mean, all these things, they are natural. So you think about, oil that's in the land and coal that's in the land and this stuff having to be mined and taken out. And, I don't really know the details, but, everything's an ecosystem. There's a whole entire ecosystem. If one thing goes, other things go. There's already a concern that, the bees aren't really doing too well. If you don't have something that can pollinate, I mean, yeah, humans can technically do it, but I mean, bees, they do that kind of stuff all day long, so, I don't know. I don't like the idea of screwing with nature. You take away one thing, it kills another thing, that kills another thing, that kills another thing, and then eventually we're not left with everything that we need as humans. And so I think it is important to be careful, but at the same time, it's some of these companies and major corporations just want the money. They just want the money. And it's very clear, after hearing a lot of this information from this video filled with so much wisdom, that there's a lot of illegal and just kind of backward stuff going on against these reservations. I mean, people usually aren't given a voice to speak out, and when they are, it's silenced. And just something not being taught in mainstream schools already makes it just that much, we get, what do you call it, brainwashed. Basically, we get brainwashed, to think a certain way so that we all know the same stuff, but at the same time, we all don't know the same stuff, too. And we'll get into that more, but, yeah, there can be views of some of the non-tribal people, needing to respect the crow, respect the lands. They mentioned that, throughout history, the only way to become a chief in Crow culture was to go into battle, as a warrior into battle. You couldn't become a chief otherwise. And so they mentioned that many of the modern veterans, there are a lot of Crow, a lot of indigenous tribes that are, in the military, a lot of modern veterans. There's a high rate of enlistment in the military, in the U.S. military. That indigenous people have, he mentioned that they have the highest rate of enlistment in the U.S. military of any group of people. And, that nowadays, in more modern times, the generations now, like Gen Z and stuff, who aren't maybe too into, going into the military sometimes, might go towards sports. And, with the Crow, basketball is very popular nowadays with the culture. And I mentioned this before about living in multiple worlds, living in 3 worlds. There was the father, Julian, talked about, James' father, Julian, talked about a medicine man who was Crow, named Frank Frisco. And Frank Frisco talked about, like Vision Quest, and Julian, the father, had it sounded like a ceremony. I don't know specifically if it was a Vision Quest he was talking about, because they were kind of talking about multiple topics at the same time, but they start talking about the Vision Quest, and then that's when Julian starts talking about this medicine man, who is a really good medicine man named Frank Frisco. They talk about the Vision Quest. They say that it involves, fasting for 4 days, smoking of a pipe. He mentioned, Julian mentioned that he witnessed a ceremony where the rocks got heated. They were like molten hot from prayer and not from lighting a fire. And Frank Frisco was the medicine man that did this, and Julian witnessed that. They talked about, I don't know if this is traditional teaching or if they were just kind of talking in general, about time and worlds that all exist at the same time, how the Gregorian calendar is linear, but when you look at Einstein's theory of relativity, the faster you go, time slows down. It slows itself until it comes to a halt, and it can be spliced to go backwards. They also talked about the tribal government. So James mentions, the tribal government that was set up. And the tribal government, he mentions, is a colonial construct. And so when he mentions this, he says it's a colonial construct, and basically it was the U.S. government that designed the tribal government. So it's basically a U.S. system of government that is on tribal lands that is called the tribal government. And with that colonial construct, they make the laws and ordinances, but it's a foreign concept in Crow country. And so, to try to adjust Crow culture into, a tribal government colonial construct that's trying to kind of like make things work on the reservation, he feels like that's one big thing that's making it so that things aren't really working, is because the way that the people are chosen to be part of this tribal government really goes through the federal government. And it's not like they're making their own real laws and rules about who gets what money or who gets what or whatever. Like, they're still kind of overseen by the United States government, even though they're still supposed to be kind of treated like their own sovereign nation, their own separate country. It's almost like they're being, the impression I get overall is like, it's almost like they're being overseen by like a bullying boss. That's kind of what it looks like, on like a very surface level, just like not very not even explaining like all the atrocities and tragedies and things. It's much bigger than that, but just looking at things, it's like, okay, you're gonna make it seem like these people get all this stuff, but then when you look at it at a deeper level, it's like I've seen, certain areas that are run down in the US that seem to have better structure, because, at least there's some kind of assistance and responsibility of the government, even though, there's still all the racism and all the kind of injustice of these systems, but we'll get more into that, but okay. But a lot of this stuff goes into a really deep level. It's easy to just like read from my notes, but it's like when I'm thinking about it, even when I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, like there was like some deep topics going into that too. This tribal government seems to be more problematic than it is useful. And we'll see why when I talk more about like laws and the ordinances and the different kind of structures set up that kind of keep the reservation poor, that keep places run down, that keep people from being able to actually thrive. I mean, if you think of it, if you can't really afford your rent because there's not really any place to work nearby, and food is super expensive, and you are also restricted from hunting on your own land, or restricted either in the areas that are purchased by people who are non-tribal people that don't let you on their land, or they're allowing other people to have permits now. It sounds like that's new that the permits are now allowed to non-tribal people to come and take to hunt on that tribal land. So that means there's less animals to hunt, and there were already not a lot of animals, but now there's less animals to hunt for the tribal people. I mean, we're gonna go into more details about that, but it's like just taking that information alone, it's like, okay, what's this tribal government actually doing? James mentions, they seem to be lining their own pockets in a lot of ways, and the system is failing. But this episode I'm trying to talk more about the traditions, but I mean, it's hard to really separate like all this political stuff from culture, because it's definitely part of the culture. Unfortunately for the Crow people, they're kind of getting screwed by the U.S. government, honestly. So James mentions that historically Crow people used teepees, and teepees are not necessarily a permanent housing structure. They have poles and the hide like around them. I don't know all the details of what it's constructed of, but he mentions that teepees are more flexible. If something's not working, you can just switch it out. If you need to move, you can just move it. If something's broken, you can just get make a new part. That's in conflict to like permanent lodging. But he mentioned like permanent lodging, like colonial style, modern Western houses. He mentioned in the culture, women would be the keepers of the home and responsible for putting up the poles, and the entire lodging was pretty much put up by the females. And he mentions with the houses, trailers, everything like that, families may move in together during hardships. He mentions, as part of the culture, people take care of their own, and they feed everyone who's in the home, and if there's someone who's a guest, you're going to offer them the best food, and it's culturally offensive to offer something lesser or to decline. If the guest declines the food that's being offered, it can be offensive because the family's offering you the best thing that they have. They're not holding out. And so for someone to decline it can be considered offensive. He mentions, back to talking about the tribal government, James mentions that there are needs for cultural jurisdictions to be enforced, such as, in the past, they used to use warriors who would enforce policies involving any kind of like crimes or illegal activities. The tribal warriors would be the ones who would take action on those things. With the tribal government, it doesn't seem like they have any kind of like actual police system. The people who are on the tribal lands can't even arrest somebody who's committing a crime. They're just kind of there to like watch over everything. And he does mention in certain parts that these people are also committing like they're selling away tribal lands that should not be sold. They're a part of that selling of the tribal lands. He mentions a chief named Plenty Coops, a chief who made a quote saying, "With education, you are the white man's equal, and without it, you are his victim." He mentions with people who get educated, who leave the Crow Reservation, who return to try to make it a better place, he says that when people try to change the status quo, they might get reprimanded or ridiculed for that. He mentioned something called the 80-hour club, where people are saying they work 80 hours a week, but you never really see them at work. I don't know if that was like, I don't know what that means. But it was kind of related to talking about like the tribal government. He mentions that, people can be comfortable. The people who are comfortable don't want anything to change because they might be getting nice checks and some money and it's sustaining them. So they don't want policies to change because it works in their favor. Whatever is going on now is working fine for them. He mentions that the leaders who get voted in usually are the ones with the largest families, because all those people in the family are likely going to vote for that one person. And it's hard to get voted out for that reason, because if they want to become a leader, they have the numbers on their side, and people are likely going to vote for their own family or clan members or members of their own family. He mentions regarding the policies and all the colonial implications, on their system in the reservation, that the foreign concepts make people fight. He mentions that every year there's there's something called the Crow Fair, and at this Crow Fair, which is located in an area called Crow Fairgrounds, the Crow Fair is held the third week of August every year. It's a 100-year-old festival. They have a powwow and rodeo and parades, teepees set up in the valley. He says it's the teepee capital of the world. He says there used to be a type of sport where, they would get all the newly caught untamed horses and put all the men who wanted to join in the sport would all go into the corral, and they would let all these horses that were untrained just run into the corral. And the goal to win was to get on one of those horses and ride it until it kind of, I guess the word is submits, or until it stands still and it's kind of tamed at that point. That makes you the winner. He said in that game it was dangerous, and people would die in that game, and they don't really do it anymore, but they still do a rodeo. He mentioned with some of the, Julian, the father, mentioned with some of the regalia that the elk teeth are worn by the women to show that the husband is a good provider. Some of the regalia has beadwork and some vibrant colors were really being seen there. And at the watering hole, James does what's called, he calls it feeding the river. He says spirits and beings are fed, showing respect. So he's shown doing like a silent prayer, and he gives a bag full of dried meat as an offering for blessings for safe travel. And in the past, he did it as a kid. His mom used to advise him to do that for safety from any kind of injuries while swimming over there. And yeah, basically while swimming. And sorry, I lost my place. He said it also feeds the spirits and the animals. And he says there's a belief that water connects us all around the world. And if you pray to the water, that prayer is kind of covering everywhere, because the water goes everywhere. And he mentions a belief that everything has a spirit and a being, and this is why there's like honor and prayer of like any kind of living thing. He says a lot of people might not care about nature, and when you look around on the reservation, even in some of the most beautiful areas, you see just kind of like trash around. Like, I don't know what it is. It doesn't really seem like it has brand names to it, but it just looks like trash of some kind, like a lot of white looking color paper. It didn't look like wrappers. I don't know. I'm assuming it's like food wrappers of stuff, but I don't really know what the trash is. But I noticed like when they were driving past, like there was one trailer that had trash on like both sides, and there were like some kind of not police, but whatever they're I think it was called the BIA. They were there, with the lights on, signifying that they were kind of doing something at that trailer, and there was trash on both sides of that trailer. There were some areas where you would see them kind of going in nature and hills and stuff, and there was like some trash along the side in certain areas and stuff too. And so it's just, it's a problem. Like, it seems like there's littering. I don't know who's doing it, where it comes from or what it was. I couldn't really identify what any of it was, but there was clearly trash on the ground. And he mentions like, a lot of people do try to pick it up, but you pick it up and you come back and it's, there's more trash there again. It's like, what's going on? And it was in very beautiful areas too. He mentions a delicacy called hulupia. It's like a sun-dried choke cherry. They can be rehydrated with water, and they make it into a cherry soup called hulupia that they make a few times a year. He mentions colonialization and Christianity infiltrated the Crow culture and influenced the tribe. So in the area where there was the Kanoko Crow tribal gas station and the Crow, there was also something called the Crow Hop Cafe. The Crow Hop Cafe. There were photos on the side of that cafe, and it said, James explained that one of the people seen on the side, one of the pictures was from a Crow scout who rode with Custer when he was near the age of 12 or 13, and that Crow scout's name was Curly. He mentions that, the Crow were not relocated as many other tribes were. He says their federation is their own land. They weren't relocated and given, not federation, it should have been reservation, sorry. Sorry. Is it good? Sorry, I think I accidentally moved something to the wrong place. Where was I? Sorry, I was trying to type and it moved. It shifted somewhere where it wasn't supposed to be. I don't know where it was, sorry. Now my notes got all screwed up. So I talked about the festival. I talked about the horse, that sport with the horses. I talked about the regalia. And I don't know. I was trying to type the word reservation instead of federation, and I don't know. So I don't know where my information went. I think I deleted something, unfortunately. Unless I pasted it somewhere. I don't think I did, though. I think I accidentally deleted the rest of what I was trying to say. My gosh. Well, I think that's all he really was saying. Let me see. Let me make sure I hit everything, though. Yeah, I think I accidentally just deleted what I was trying to say. But, yeah, I only have the part up to where it says the information about the regalia. But anyways, I guess the last part, I don't know what I put there, but it looks like it says, there's a lot of areas that are going for leases. They're leasing out land, and they're extracting resources from the land. There's an area called Lodge Grass Valley, Lodge Grass Valley of the Chiefs. He says is called Oshawajicha. He mentions that food is like a type of medicine, and per Crow tradition, food was made with a protein, a fat, and berries, something similar to like pemmican, and now you see those types of pemmican type of products all over the market, really. Especially if you're into outdoorsy stuff, you kind of see it a lot. Sorry that I deleted that information that I was trying to read. I mean, it's in the video, but I don't know what I was trying to say basically about the reservation, but all right, well, I'm gonna end this one here, and thanks for listening.